are these people?
Well,
So
on to our
moving
next
on
story.
from India to
Europe,
Ukraine, I guess.
not too far
Well,
away.
yeah.
But this guy, Koki Smurf here, decided to do an interview with the Economist, right? So here's Moon of Alabama, and I apologize. I looked for who wrote this. I think this is just their kind of like from their Ukraine section.
That's fine.
So I have the link down in the doobly-doo as always, as most of our articles are placed there. And I think the article links to these Economist articles as well. So this is a couple days ago, September 11th, right? So here it is. Donald Trump will never support Putin, says Volodymyr Zelensky. But Ukraine's president fears that some of the country's Western backers are losing faith. I wouldn't bet on this either, Mr. Z-Man there. So, the Alabama article says it includes his unusual, unrealistic platitudes about not ending the war until Russia has completely pulled back. Speaking with an English language media, he didn't miss to mention the ever misunderstood story about Chamberlain's move in Munich. Tapping loudly on the table, Mr. Zelensky rejects outright the idea of compromise with Putin. War will continue for as long as Russia remains on Ukrainian territory, he says. A negotiated deal would not be permanent.
Pause.
Yeah.
War will continue as long we give them money.
Yes, we're getting to that. A negotiated deal would not be permanent. The Russian president has a habit of creating frozen conflicts on Russia's borders. In Georgia, for example, not as ends in themselves, but because his goal is to restore the Soviet Union. Interesting assumption there, Zelensky. Those who chose to talk to the man in the Kremlin are, quote, tricking themselves. Much like the Western leaders who signed an agreement with Adolf Hitler at Munich in 1938, only to watch him invade Czechoslovakia. The mistake is not diplomacy, but the mistake is diplomacy with Putin. He negotiates only with himself. Interesting projection there from the guy with Nazis in his fucking war bands, but what do I know? In 1938, Chamberlain had no other choice but to give in on Czechoslovakia. Britain was not ready for war, and the parts Hitler wanted to annex from Czechoslovakia had undeniably a largely German population. Right? He contended that Sudeten German grievances were justified and believed that Hitler's intentions were limited. Zelensky goes on to threaten, in rather unthankful fashion, those countries which have delivered aid to Ukraine but may want to cut their losses. What were you saying earlier about the money, Colin? Curtailing aid to Ukraine will only prolong the war. Just says that right out in the open, Mr. Zelensky argues, and it would create risks for the West in its own backyard. There is no way of predicting how the millions of Ukrainian refugees in European countries, remember those? Remember all those white refugees that we accepted?
Yep.
Would react to their country being abandoned. Ukrainians have generally behaved well and are very grateful to those who sheltered them. They will not forget that generosity. It sounds like you want them to. But it would not be a good story for Europe if it were to drive these people into a corner. Back to Moon of Alabama, I have seen such threats from low-ranking individuals of the fascist Bandera fringe. They spoke of terrorism they would unleash in the West should it end its support for Ukraine. That the Ukrainian president now reinforces such threats shows how deeply he immersed himself in that mindset. A previous Economist story shows that Ukraine has already set up the necessary infrastructure to wage a terrorist campaign. Here it is, Colin. Inside Ukraine's assassination program, its agents has become expert in dark revenge, but some worry a clear strategy is absent. In modern Ukraine, assassinations date back to at least 2015, when its domestic security service, the SBU, created a new body after Russia had seized Crimea and the eastern Donbass region. The elite 5th Counterintelligence Directorate started life as a saboteur force in response to the invasion. It later came to focus on what is euphemistically called wet work. What does that sound like, Colin?
Wet work?
Yeah, yeah. As a as
I have
a
no idea.
as a counterintelligence division, what do you think wet work versus dry work is? Wet work involves blood, I would imagine.
Okay.
And CIA for murder is sole construct likes to, yeah, that's, yep, wet work. Valentina Nalivayanchenko, who headed the SBU at the time, says the switch came about when Ukraine's then leaders decided that a policy of imprisoning collaborators was not enough. Prisons were overflowing. Sounds familiar. But few were deterred. We reluctantly came to the conclusion that we needed to eliminate terrorists. He says a former officer of the directorate describes it in similar terms. We needed to bring war to them. In 2015 and 2016, the directorate was linked to the assassinations of key Russian-backed commanders in the Donbass. Mikhail Tolevsky, also aka Givy, killed in a rocket attack. Arsen Pavlov, aka Motorola, blown up in a lift. Alexander Sarkenchenko, blown up in a restaurant. We've I think covered that restaurant bombing before, or someone on the network did. Valentino
Amy Crab.
Nilivchenko, who headed the SBU at the time, he read that. Intelligence Insider says the SBU's fifth directorate is playing a central role in counter-Russian operations. So, they've also been peddling in some propaganda of themselves. You see this going around on Twitter today, Colin?
I did actually. I
Yeah,
saw. I haven't watched it, but I seen it on Twitter today.
yeah.
Yes.
So we're gonna watch it here if I do this and then this and here. So this is one of their. This is the truth. I don't know if you've heard of this thing. Has big
Mm,
quotations on that. This is essentially, Ukraine. It's those things where North Korea puts out their like person to talk about what happened,
yeah.
and okay, that's
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
much what
Yeah.
this is, but from this lady.
Russia hates
Um,
the truth that their obsessive focus on a Ukrainian volunteer is simply allowing the light of the Ukrainian nation's honesty to shine brightly.
mm,
Next week, the teeth of the Russian devils will gnash ever harder, and their rabid mouths will foam in uncontrollable frenzy as the world will see a favorite Kremlin propagandist pay for their crimes. And this puppet of Putin is only the first. Russia's war criminal propagandists will all be hunted down, and justice will be served as we in Ukraine are led on this mission by faith in God, liberty, and complete liberation.
so
Russia.
there you go, Colin. They're gonna go after propagandists, right?
Right.
And serve justice in countries that they are not the justice servers. I mean, it sounds like that's called terrorism, in my opinion. Um, you know, Aaron Bastani on Twitter agrees. This deranged video sounds like Ukraine may plan to carry out attacks, plausibly extrajudicial killings, against those they view as Russian propagandists. If that happens outside their own borders, it is terrorism. If it happens in the UK or Europe, there should be massive consequences. Um, so there's that. Um, you know, But anyway, back to this article. From there, it's just a step towards total war. This is that Economist article again. Meanwhile, a long war of attrition would mean a fork in the road for Ukraine. The country would lose even more people, both on the front lines and to immigration. It would require a totally militarized economy. The government would have to put that prospect to its citizens. Mr. Zelensky says, without specifying how, a new social contract could not be the decision of one person. Almost 19 months into the war, the president says he is morally ready for the switch, but he will only broach the idea with his people if the weakness in the eyes of his Western backers becomes a trend. Has that moment come? No, not yet, he says. Thank God. Um, so, does Zelensky know of any country with a totally militarized economy that survived? I have yet to hear of one. Anyway, to end the war is not in his hands, but can the West end the war? Ives Smith takes a look. She concludes that an end to the war is unlikely until bigger things change. In other words, the way to an end game is regime change, and the weak regimes are all in the West. Right? So,
Yep.
yeah. What says you, Care Bear? Anything?
Well, so essentially, Zelensky is trying to guilt trip us to keep the war going.
Oh,
It's
he's straight
essentially what I'm
threatening.
reading.
He's like, it'd be a
Right.
shame if something happened to that nice Europe you got, that we
Right.
sent a ton of refugees to, you know? Like, could you imagine any other country sending their refugees here and then threatening like that? Yeah, that wouldn't go down well,
No, well, try a black
Right. Like,
person.
try Iranian refugees or, you
Right.
know,
Anyone
like
of color, try.
Yemeni
And
refugees. So,
right.
yeah, not good.
I don't know. Like anyone who kind of continues to support this war at this point, which I think now like support in this war is decreasing.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot, in my opinion, but yeah. But the fact that like Zelensky is basically threatening the West to be like, you need to do something, or bad things will happen to you all. Like it's already has.
It sounds
So
like Al Qaeda. It sounds like,
right.
I mean, are we gonna create another giant religious based terrorist organization with funding from us and weapons from us, and like, so yeah, I mean, same thing we've done about 1,000 times now.
Right.
So
But you can argue, and I've seen in the chat that the Biden administration have essentially enabled this.
yes,
So, so it's like really at this point, it should be us, and we're not going to anytime soon, like barring something happens to Biden again, like, that prevents that. But, we created the monster, and only we can essentially stop it at this point. Now, I feel like politically that might be the administration might consider that suicide, considering the Russia gating that has taken place over the last few years. That I don't think people will necessarily support that. But that being said, I think also people are getting to feel it in their pockets in terms of, we're seeing all this money just carte blanche going off overseas, and we're struggling here. And I keep saying this, like this is going to be a hard winter for many people. Like
mm-hmm.
as I said, the holidays are coming and people may not get gifts this year. Like as I said, like we're seeing Christmas stuff on sale already, and it's
Oh, well,
September.
they're already buying Russian oil at exorbitant prices since a certain pipeline was blown up, but
Right.
just to keep the heat on. So,
And meanwhile, France is basically being bitches in Niger in terms
mm-hmm.
of their resources, and like so like Europe is desperate, like,
Yup.
and going essentially to the global south for help. Well, not help, but like give us your shit. And now Africans are like, no, fuck yourselves. So it's just a whole mess all around. And honestly, if Zelensky really cared, he should be calling for some kind of negotiation towards for a ceasefire or something at this point, because really, I can't imagine any more of this happening without there being a lot more issues with people here. And I think especially in Europe that, it would be almost detrimental to the our administration, if this keeps going.
Well, I'm surprised they haven't taken care of them yet at this point. We're more than willing to just go, oh, I don't have that on that board. Let's do this then. How about this?
Bye, Felicia.
There we go.
There you go.
I have the button's just not linked.